Imagine this. You are sitting in a small stone chamber, its walls damp with age, its air heavy with the scent of wax and parchment. A candle flickers low, casting unsteady shadows across a table worn smooth by generations of hands. Upon it lies a map, yellowed, fragile, its edges curled and frayed by centuries of silence. It is not like any map you've ever seen. The year written in faded ink along its border is 1351, a time before Columbus, before Magellan, before the so-called Age of Discovery would reshape the world. And yet, this map dares to suggest the impossible. Along its surface, lines ripple like the edges of unfamiliar coasts. Small islands dot the seas in places no scholar of the 14th century should have known. But it is what lies in the center of the Atlantic that unsettles you most. A great round mass of land, almost perfect in shape, as if drawn with compass and rule, where no land should be. Some say this was no ordinary cartographer's work. The style, the lettering, the unmistakable symbols etched in ink crosses, circles, cryptic annotations speak of the hand of the Knights Templar. And here, the first great question rises like a tide. How could warrior monks, known for their crusades and fortresses, sketch the coastline of a land never recorded, never charted, never seen? Pause for a moment. Close your eyes. Picture Europe in the year 1351. The plague had passed, leaving towns hushed and villages half empty. Fields untended, bells tolling not for mass, but for death. It was a world drowning in shadows. And in such a world, secrets could pass unnoticed, tucked away in abbeys, in chests, in hidden vaults beneath the earth. This map is one such secret. Near the outline of that impossible island, faint words in Latin appear, blurred by time. No one has found the word Atlantis written there. Yet what remains is suggestive enough. The phrase reads something like Regnum sub aqua, the kingdom beneath the waters. The echo is unmistakable. If you let your imagination drift, you might place yourself in the role of a nameless monk, seated in a monastery on the Portuguese coast, who stumbles upon this parchment while searching through the library's forgotten shelves. Your hands tremble. The map is older than it should be, and what it depicts is not supposed to exist. You feel a strange mixture of awe and dread, for what you hold is not merely ink and vellum. It is a fracture in the story of the world. Some would dismiss it as a forgery, a fanciful sketch born of myth and rumor. But if it were only fantasy, how could its lines echo so precisely the contours of lands centuries away from official discovery? And if it were nothing but a joke, why would it emerge from the very circle of men who, only decades earlier, vanished with their fleet into the unknown? The questions pile up, gentle but insistent, like waves against a hull. Did the Templars sail westward? Past the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar into the sea the ancients called the Ocean of Darkness? Did they hear whispers of a drowned realm, a circle city lost to pride and flood? Did they draw it here, not as proof, but as memory? No answer survives. History, as it often does, holds its silence. And sometimes, silence weighs more than words. Can you see it now? A Templar knight, white mantle marked by the crimson cross, bent over a small desk aboard a ship. Outside, the Atlantic roars, the wind tears at canvas sails. But inside, under the dim glow of an oil lamp, he sketches. His pen moves with calm assurance. He has never seen these shores, not with his own eyes, but he believes. He believes because someone before him whispered of them, because knowledge, like relics, can be carried hand to hand across generations. The map does not say Atlantis. Instead, it leaves circles, concentric rings, like ripples spreading across still water. And the words, cryptic, almost protective. The kingdom beneath the waters. For the Templars were masters of concealment. They never wrote directly what they most cherished. They scattered clues, veiled hints, fragments of a puzzle meant only for those who shared their faith and their silence. Now pause and ask yourself, if you had lived in the 14th century, if you had seen this map, what would you have done? Would you have believed, or would you have burned it, afraid of the church's shadow, afraid of what such knowledge might mean? Perhaps that is why this parchment survived, not in plain sight, but as a whisper, passed from voice to voice, drifting like smoke through the corridors of history. Not evidence, but invitation. Not a revelation, but a door left slightly open. And tonight, centuries later, you sit before it in your mind's eye. You watch the candlelight flicker over its ink. The waves of its coastlines blur and shimmer as though alive. And somewhere, deep in your thoughts, you feel it calling this strange, forbidden land that may never have been, yet somehow lingers. The map does not vanish. The ink does not fade. It waits. It waits for someone else to lean close, to listen carefully, and to follow its whisper westward into the dark Atlantic night. And tonight, that someone is you. Picture the harbor of La Rochelle, October 1307. The air is heavy with mist, the kind that clings to sails and cloaks, softening every sound into a muffled echo. Lanterns swing gently along the quay, their flames blurred, their light trembling across the dark water. It is a night of endings. By dawn, the order of the Knights Templar would be shattered. King Philip IV of France had already plotted their fall, aided by Pope Clement. Arrest warrants were written, accusations whispered into the ears of soldiers. Heresy, idolatry, blasphemy, all charges, none proven, but all deadly. And so, on this night, the brothers of the Temple knew what awaited them. La Rochelle was no ordinary port. It was the Templars' lifeline to the sea, a stronghold of ships and trade, a place where their wealth moved silently across the waves. From here, fleets had sailed to the Holy Land. From here, supplies and secrets were carried north to England, west to Portugal, and south into the Mediterranean. And from here, something vanished, something history cannot quite account for. They say there were at least 18 ships moored at La Rochelle that evening. Some argue more. By morning, none remained. Not destroyed, not captured, not recorded, simply gone. Can you hear it? The muffled shouts of sailors hurriedly preparing. The creak of ropes strained against wooden masts. The low chant of men pulling anchors from the water. The harbor, cloaked in fog, conceals their departure. To those who might have watched from the shore, it was nothing but shadows moving within shadows, lanterns swallowed by mist. What were they carrying, these knights and mariners? Was it gold, relics, or was it knowledge a map? Perhaps the same one whispered about in later centuries. A parchment inked with coasts not yet revealed to the rest of mankind. The chronicles fall silent here, leaving only speculation. But silence, as we've said before, is often where the most enduring mysteries dwell. Imagine yourself as one of them. The order you've served your entire life is collapsing. Your brothers are being hunted. Torture, prison, fire await those who stay. But here, aboard a ship rocking gently against the tide, you sense freedom or at least the possibility of it. Ahead lies the dark Atlantic, the ocean sea, vast and unyielding. Behind you, betrayal and chains. The choice is no choice at all. You sail, and so the fleet slipped away, carrying with it not only men but legend. Where did they go? Some whisper they fled north to Scotland, welcomed by sympathetic lords. Others say they hid in Portugal, where the order would later transform into the Knights of Christ. Still others insist they went further westward beyond the horizon, chasing the ghost of a land once described by Plato, Atlantis. The harbor remembers. The stones of La Rochelle, still damp with salt, still whisper when the wind passes through. If you walked there today, when the sea is quiet and the gulls circle overhead, you can almost hear the creak of timbers, the rush of sails unfurling, the voices of men speaking in hushed urgency. You can almost see them slipping into the fog, never to return. It is a haunting thought, an entire fleet erased from record, and yet its absence more powerful than presence. For absence invites questions, and questions grow into myth. Some scholars dismiss it as exaggeration. No such fleet existed, they say. It is the invention of later storytellers, embroidered upon scraps of fact. And yet, if no fleet existed, why did whispers of it endure? Why did locals speak of white-mantled men vanishing into the Atlantic night? Why did records of La Rochelle suddenly grow sparse, as if someone had erased a line from the page of history? The night itself becomes part of the myth. The last night at La Rochelle, where the Templars' ships sailed out of history and into legend. Consider the weight of that silence. An order persecuted, their leaders dragged in chains to Paris, their Grand Master Jacques de Molay destined for the pyre, and yet a remnant untouched, unbroken, carrying with them something worth hiding, something worth entrusting to the sea. If you close your eyes, you can see the sails billowing against the wind, their crosses faintly illuminated by the lantern glow. You can smell the tar, the wet wood, the brine. You can feel the tremor in your chest, the fear and the hope mingling as one. You are leaving behind the known world, stepping into the darkness of the unknown. Did they sail for Scotland, for Portugal, or further still westward, where maps ended and imagination began? If so, did they believe they would find safety? Or did they believe they would find something greater, something long lost, yet whispered of in the writings of the ancients? We do not know, but the image lingers. The night holds its breath. The harbor remains empty. And with the disappearance of that fleet, a door opened in history. A door not to proof, but to possibility. To the question of whether the Templars, pursued and cornered, became not only guardians of relics, but seekers of forgotten worlds. And so the stage is set. A map in 1351, a fleet vanished in 1307, two fragments of a puzzle, separated by decades, yet drawn together by silence. If the Templars did indeed flee into the Atlantic night, what was it they hoped to find? The answer may lie in whispers, older than Christendom itself, whispers carried from Plato's Athens to medieval abbeys, from parchment to sail, from silence to sea. And tonight, those whispers drift toward you across centuries, like the faint light of a lantern lost in fog. Dawn broke over La Rochelle the next morning, pale and indifferent. The mist clung to the harbor stones, the gulls cried as they always did, and yet something was missing. The quays where the Templar fleet had rested were empty. No anchors, no sails, no voices of men tending to ropes. The harbor was silent, as though the sea itself had swallowed the memory of the night before. Witnesses spoke in hushed tones of shadows slipping into the fog. They spoke of sails unfurling, of lanterns swaying in the dark. But when asked where the ships had gone, no one could say. Not north, not south, only west, into the Atlantic where no sane mariner dared to travel. 18 ships, Some say, others whisper of more. All vanished, leaving nothing but questions. And questions have a way of multiplying. For what did they carry? Was it the gold of the temple? Hidden treasure spirited away before Philip's soldiers could seize it? Was it relics, the Holy Grail, the Ark, fragments of Solomon's wisdom, the bones of saints? Or was it something more dangerous still? Knowledge, a secret written on parchment, folded into the chests of captains, protected by ink and faith. The chronicles remain silent. The papal inquests mention no ships, no departure, only accusations of heresy. The king's clerks, eager to list every coin and jewel seized, record nothing of the fleet. And so the silence itself becomes a kind of evidencer, blank space too deliberate to be accident. Imagine the ships now, gliding westward into the unknown, the wind filling their sails, the creak of timbers, the steady rhythm of waves striking their hulls. On deck, knights and sailors huddle close, watching as the coast of France fades behind them. Some may have wept, some may have prayed, and others, perhaps, stared into the horizon with a strange fire in their eyes, believing they were not merely fleeing, but following a calling. For, in whispers passed down through monasteries and markets, they had heard of a land beyond the setting sun. Plato had described it in his dialogues, a great island outside the Pillars of Hercules, larger than Libya, and Asia together, whose kings grew proud, whose city fell beneath the sea, Atlantis. If the Templars sought such a place, then the fleet of La Rochelle was not only an escape, it was an expedition. Centuries later, fishermen along the coast of Portugal spoke of white-cloaked men seen in the Azores, of stone crosses carved upon the rocks. Sailors in Madeira whispered of strangers arriving long before the crown planted its flag. Legends lingered in Morocco of pale warriors who bartered not with gold, but with knowledge. Were these fragments of the fleet, scattered by storm, dispersed by fate? Or were they deliberate footprints, markers of a path westward, deeper into mystery? The ocean is vast, and it holds its secrets well. Many a ship has gone down without leaving even splinters. Yet in the silence that followed La Rochelle, the fleet became more than wood and rope. It became a story, a symbol of disappearance. Proof not of where they went, but of how much can vanish into the sea without a trace. And here lies the truth of legends. The less we know, the more we dream. Consider how often the world's greatest mysteries begin not with discovery, but with absence. The Library of Alexandria, burned. The tomb of Alexander the Great, lost. The fleet of the Templars, gone. In each void, imagination rushes in, filling the silence with what might have been. And for the Templars, that void pointed westward, to the land of rings and ruins Plato described. The question grows sharper. What if they found it? What if the fleet, sailing beyond the map's edge, reached shores not drawn on parchment, but remembered only in whispers? Perhaps they never returned because there was no need. Perhaps they found refuge in a place the rest of the world had forgotten. Or perhaps they were swallowed whole, not by storm, but by the very ocean that once claimed Atlantis itself. Knights and secrets dragged into the same abyss. The harbor of La Rochelle stands today, its stones weathered, its waters calm. Tourists walk where Templars once trod. Children throw bread to gulls where knights once loaded cargo. Yet if you stand there at dusk, when fog drifts low and the sea grows dark, you may feel it. The echo of sails, the murmur of oars, the fleet that is gone but never forgotten, gone, yet alive in memory, vanished, yet more powerful in absence than presence, a silence that speaks louder than proof. And so we are left with a paradox. The fleet that vanishes becomes a fleet that endures, carried not by waves, but by whispers. Every time the word Atlantis is spoken, every time the Templars' name is invoked, the missing ships stir again in imagination, slipping once more into the fog of La Rochelle, bound for a destination unknown. History cannot tell us where they went, but perhaps history does not need to. Perhaps the vanishing itself is the story. Perhaps the silence is the answer. And perhaps, just perhaps, the ships are still out there, somewhere beyond the horizon, sailing endlessly across the dark Atlantic, searching for a kingdom beneath the waters. Long before the Knights Templar sailed from La Rochelle, before white mantles and crimson crosses marked their order, there was a voice that first spoke of a kingdom drowned. His name was Plato. More than 1,000 years earlier, in Athens, he had written to dialogues Timaeus and Critias. In them, between discussions of nature and the cosmos, he described a story passed down from Egyptian priests, a tale of a great island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the straits we now call Gibraltar, an island vast and rich, with concentric rings of land and water circling a glittering capital, a kingdom of engineers, sailors, philosophers, and kings, a power so immense it sought to conquer the known world. And then, in a single day and night of misfortune, it sank beneath the sea. Plato's words are sparse, yet vivid. He wrote of a people blessed with abundance fertile soil, precious metals, herds of cattle, and ships that crossed every ocean. He spoke of temples crowned in gold, of walls plated in bronze, of canals and harbors more advanced than any in Greece. And he warned of their fall not from weakness, but from pride. The gods, he said, grew weary of their arrogance, and so the earth shook, the seas rose, and Atlantis was swallowed whole. For centuries, scholars debated, was Plato's tale history or allegory, a parable of hubris, or the memory of something real? Many dismissed it as a fable, but others wondered if the philosopher had preserved a truth far older than his own city. Now imagine, a millennium later, a knight of the temple seated in a scriptorium, a monastery lit by oil lamps. The Crusades had carried him eastward, to Antioch, to Constantinople, to Cairo. There he met scholars of the Arab world, guardians of Greek texts long forgotten in the West. Through them, Plato's dialogues were reborn, inked in Arabic, then carried back into Latin by monks and translators. The knight listens as a translator reads aloud. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules, there lay an island, larger than Libya and Asia combined. The words fall like a spell. To a man who believes the sea hides mysteries, who has heard whispers of lost knowledge from Egypt's priests, how could this not sound like truth? And so the Templars began to wonder, was Plato's drowned kingdom a warning or a guide? Consider their fascination with geometry, with sacred architecture, with hidden meaning. They built fortresses aligned to stars, churches carved with spirals and circles, chapels adorned with images that seemed out of place. Did they see in Plato's rings of Atlantis the pattern they sought to replicate? Did they believe their task was not only to guard relics of the Holy Land, but to recover wisdom lost before Christ himself walked the earth? The ink of Plato had long dried, but the words remained alive, transmitted, translated, transfigured. For the Templars, always seekers of hidden knowledge, those words were more than story. They were a map. Think of it, a fleet vanishing westward from La Rochelle, guided not by charts of known lands, but by a passage written in Athens 2,000 years before. The coordinates were not numbers but myth, the compass not magnetic but philosophical. What if the sea they crossed was not merely water, but metaphor, an ocean of silence between past and present? The West held no certainty, but in Plato's description, they found direction. Rings of land and sea, a city beyond Gibraltar. A memory passed through Egypt to Greece, carried through translation, whispered into their ears. And so the ink of Plato became the wind in their sails. It is a haunting image, parchment upon parchment, copied by careful hands in abbeys, each word a seed planted in the minds of men sworn to secrecy. The Templars did not need proof. Faith was enough. And in the world they inhabited, where relics bled, saints walked, and miracles flickered like stars, Atlantis was not only possible, it was probable. Perhaps that is why the Vatican grew uneasy. For a story like Plato's, if taken too literally, could undermine the narrative of Genesis, of the flood, of creation as taught by the Church. A kingdom older than the Bible, a catastrophe outside its scripture. Dangerous ideas, too tempting to suppress. But the Templars listened, and perhaps they believed. Now, centuries later, when we read Plato's words by lamplight, we too wonder, were they allegory or memory? Was the philosopher cloaking truth in parable, the way the Templars cloaked their secrets in symbols? The question has no answer, but the silence invites us to imagine. Picture again the concentric rings Plato described, 3 of water, 2 of land, encircling a shining acropolis. Picture the Templars drawing those rings in sand, then carving them into stone, then embedding them into chapels across Europe. Each a quiet echo of a city lost, each a fragment of ink translated into stone, into architecture, into geometry. The ink of Plato, in this way, never dried. It lived in whispers, in walls, in voyages never recorded. It may even have lived in the fleet that slipped into the fog of La Rochelle, carrying with it not just treasure or relics, but a dream inherited from Athens. And tonight, as you drift between waking and sleep, perhaps you see it too, the city of rings, its walls shining, its harbors alive with ships. You hear its voices, its music, its laughter. And then, just as quickly, you feel the tremor beneath your feet, the rush of water, the silence of the sea. Atlantis sinks again, this time not in ocean, but in memory. And the ink of Plato waits, patiently, for someone to read it once more. Centuries after Plato wrote of a kingdom beneath the waves, and centuries after the Templars vanished from La Rochelle, a new mystery surfaced, one drawn not in words, but in lines of ink. Maps that should not exist. Consider the Piri race map, crafted in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. It shows, with uncanny detail, the coastline of South America before Europeans were thought to have charted its southern reaches. More strangely still, it sketches what appears to be Antarctica, not covered in ice as it is today, but ice-free, as if copied from a source thousands of years old. How could this be? How could knowledge so precise appear on parchment centuries before expeditions confirmed it? The answer most scholars give is simple. Fragments of older maps, inherited from forgotten cartographers, preserved in libraries, now lost. But if we ask who might have carried such fragments into the hands of later navigators, another possibility whispers: the Templars. Imagine their vanished fleet, not destroyed, but dispersed, carrying chests filled not with gold, but with knowledge. Charts copied from ancient sources in the East. Maps translated from Greek or Arabic texts. Maps that in turn drew on something older still. Perhaps even maps of Atlantis itself. For among the Templars, secrecy was survival. They hid symbols in stone, knowledge in code, and truth in silence. Why not maps, too? And the Piri race map is not alone. The Cantino planisphere of 1502 depicts Brazil's coastline with startling accuracy, though no explorer of that age had traveled so far. The Zeno map of 1380, though contested, hints at northern voyages long before Columbus. Even the Vinland map, debated as forgery or truth, points to a memory of land westward. Each map is a whisper, a fragment, a line drawn by someone who should not have known. The Vatican, too, guarded maps. Its archives held atlases, restricted to papal eyes, containing coasts not yet claimed, islands not yet named. Portugal kept its Padrão Real, a master chart so secret it was considered a weapon. But where did the first sketches come from? Who first drew the outlines that others copied? Here, the silence deepens. The official story leaves gaps wide enough for imagination to sail through. Suppose the Templars, before their fall, had gathered fragments of ancient knowledge from the East. Suppose their ships carried these parchments across the sea when they fled La Rochelle. Suppose these fragments found their way, through hidden hands, into the collections of navigators who later claimed discovery. Would that not explain why maps appeared that seemed centuries ahead of their time? Picture, if you will, a knight standing in a candlelit chamber, unrolling a scroll of parchment copied from an older source. Upon it, coastlines ripple where no European has yet sailed. He traces them with his finger, whispering a vow that the knowledge will not be lost. Then, years later, a ship departs under cover of fog, carrying that very scroll westward into the unknown. Such images may be dream, yet they persist. For dreams are born in silence, and silence is what history has left us. The Templars understood the power of maps. To know a land is to control it. To chart a sea is to command it. And perhaps, to possess a map of Atlantis, whether real or allegorical, was to hold a key to the greatest mystery of all. The memory of a civilization that rose and fell before recorded time. The phrase maps that shouldn't exist is not just about coastlines and ink. It is about what lies beneath those coastlines. The suggestion that human history is older, stranger, deeper than we allow ourselves to believe. When you look at the Piri race map, the Cantino planisphere, the Zeno map, you see more than drawings. You see fragments of memory. Memories carried across centuries, disguised as cartography. And perhaps, you see the faint shadow of a city of rings. Drowned and forgotten, yet still etched somewhere in the collective mind of mankind. The Templars, if they carried such maps, were not merely warriors or bankers. They were keepers of memory, guardians of whispers older than kingdoms. And if their fleet vanished carrying charts of unknown lands, then every strange map that appeared in later centuries may be a ghost of their legacy. Consider the irony. Official history praises Columbus for reaching the New World, Magellan for circling the globe, Piri race for drawing its coasts. But behind their triumphs may lie the silence of men, erased men who fled La Rochelle, who sailed under stars, uncharted, who vanished into the Atlantic night. And tonight, as you close your eyes, you might see one of those maps yourself. Lines wavering in the candlelight, edges curling, ink fading but not forgotten. You follow the coast with your gaze, and it leads you not to Spain, not to Portugal, but further west, to a circle in the sea. A circle that should not exist, yet insists on being remembered. Maps that shouldn't exist, but they do. And in their survival, they remind us that silence is never empty. It is full of echoes. The Atlantic is wide. To medieval sailors, it was a wilderness of waves, a place where stars wheeled strangely and storms could swallow whole fleets without a trace. And yet, far out in that restless ocean, a scattering of volcanic islands rises like the backs of sleeping giants. The Azores. Today, they are Portuguese territory, a remote archipelago where green peaks pierce the mist and basalt cliffs drop straight into the sea. But if you listen to the locals, you will hear older stories that should not exist. Stories of stone crosses, weathered and ancient, carved long before the Portuguese are said to have discovered these islands in the 15th century. It is here that the Templar trail flickers back to life. Imagine a ship slipping westward from La Rochelle in 1307. Sails catching the night wind, its crew knowing only that their survival depends on reaching a land unrecorded. Days stretch into weeks, the Atlantic yawns open, and then, at last, black peaks appear on the horizon. Land, safe harbor, the Azores. The textbooks will tell you the Azores were unknown before 1427, but scattered accounts suggest otherwise. A Catalan chart from the 14th century marks islands suspiciously close to their location, labeled with strange symbols. Another medieval portolan, rediscovered centuries later, shows land masses west of Iberia, each decorated not with names, but with crosses. And then there are the stones themselves. Across several of the Azores Islands, half buried in moss or tucked into ruined terraces, are carvings of crosses, simple, stark, unmistakable. They are not the Greek cross, nor the Latin. They are crosses, but they, the very form borne on the white mantles of the Templar order. One stands near Lagoa do Fogo, set into a terrace wall that seems older than any Portuguese settlement. Another was found chiseled deep into basalt on Snow Miguel, so weathered that it must have endured centuries of storms. And local tradition passed from shepherd to shepherd, farmer to farmer claims these crosses were not carved by settlers at all, but discovered already there. If true, the implications are profound. It would mean the Azores were not just a stopover for Portuguese explorers, but a staging ground centuries earlier, perhaps, for the very fleet that vanished from La Rochelle. Picture it: Templar knights, their order outlawed, their brothers burned at the stake, steering their ships into these remote harbors. They unload supplies, carve their symbol into the stone, and perhaps even leave behind hidden caches of documents, relics, or maps. For them, this is not conquest, it is survival, it is secrecy. The Azores are not gentle. Their volcanic cliffs rise like fortresses, their coasts are lashed by endless surf. Yet for men trained in both endurance and silence, the islands offered something priceless: isolation, a place to hide, to plan, to wait. Some historians dismiss the crosses as later inventions, carved by settlers or missionaries who sought to sanctify the land. But the silence of the early Portuguese explorers is telling. When they arrived in the 15th century, they wrote of finding strange terraces, stonework, and even traces of cultivation already abandoned. They did not claim to have carved crosses themselves, but they did record finding signs of occupation, signs of who or what they never explained. Local legend adds another layer. Among Azorean folk tales are whispers of the men in white, strangers who arrived long ago, who built with uncanny skill and then vanished. No language was remembered, no names survived, only the image of white robes and the mark of the cross. Coincidence, perhaps, or memory. And there is something else. From the Azores, the sea stretches further westward. The islands form a natural stepping stone, a midpoint between Europe and the vast unknown. To sailors with secret maps that shouldn't exist, the Azores would have been a perfect way station, a place to resupply before pushing on toward a greater destination, toward the drowned kingdom itself. If Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Azores stood as its threshold. Some fringe researchers even suggest the islands are the last peaks of Atlantis, the mountaintops of a continent swallowed by the sea. Geology offers little support for such claims, yet the volcanic drama of the islands makes the idea difficult to dismiss outright. Black cliffs plunge into boiling surf, caves echo with the thunder of waves, and fumaroles hiss like the earth itself remembering a catastrophe. Even if the Azores are not Atlantis, they may have been remembered as its echo. And the crosses of stone, carved into basalt and granite, may have been the Templars' way of saying, "We were here. We remembered. We passed through," carrying with us a memory the world had forgotten. In the flicker of torchlight, you can almost see them knights in white mantles, gathering on a windswept ridge above the ocean. They face west, toward an unseen horizon. Behind them, Europe burns. Ahead of them, mystery. One of them kneels and carves a cross into the stone. Not for conquest, not for posterity, for remembrance. The Azores still hold secrets. Subterranean tunnels with no clear purpose, stone paths leading nowhere, fragments of European ceramics dated to a century too early, and always the crosses. They may not prove that Templars found Atlantis, but they whisper of journeys undertaken, of voyages erased, of men who vanished into the Atlantic and left behind only symbols carved in stone. And perhaps tonight, as you drift toward sleep, you can hear the Atlantic wind sweeping through the Azores, carrying with it the murmur of waves against basalt cliffs and the faint, stubborn echo of a cross carved where it should not be. A reminder, silent yet enduring, that history is not just what we are told, it is also what is hidden. Not all trails lead west. Some circle back inland, to stone keeps and forgotten vaults, where silence itself seems to breathe. North of Paris, in the rolling countryside of Normandy, stands the Château d'Azores. To the casual visitor, it is a ruin of turrets and walls, a relic of medieval France. But to those who know how to listen, Azores is more than stone. It is a whisper of secrets, a vault where memory sleeps. For centuries, stories have clung to its name. Stories of buried treasure, of sealed chambers, of a manuscript never meant to be read aloud. They call it the Codex of Azores. The tale begins not with knights, but with a caretaker. In the 17th century, Roger Lemoyne, keeper of Azores, claimed he discovered a hidden chamber beneath the chapel. Within it, he said, were 30 iron coffers and bundles of scrolls wrapped in linen. He reported his discovery. And then, quietly, the chamber was sealed again. No photos, no official follow-up, only silence. Skeptics dismiss his account as invention. Yet the rumor refuses to die. For in the region's older monastic inventories, there are cryptic entries describing a book of mirrored lands kept under guard in the 14th century. One entry calls it Templum Terra, secreted the temple of the secret earth. Another simply refers to a book of concentric waters and fire. Was this the Codex of Azores? Imagine, if you will, a Templar knight fleeing persecution in 1307. He carries not gold, but parchment. He seeks refuge, not at sea, but in stone. In the vaults beneath Azores, among tunnels carved from chalk, he hides a manuscript codex said to contain the memory of a drowned world. Descriptions of the codex vary, but they share certain details. The manuscript was said to be written in alternating languages, Latin, Greek, perhaps even Arabic. The script itself was inconsistent, as if copied by many hands. Within its pages, drawings of a land laid out in concentric circles, rivers flowing like rings of a tree, At its center, a temple of impossible geometry. No name is given, but the image is unmistakable: Atlantis. And then, at the end of the manuscript, a vision: fire falling from the sky, waves rising higher than towers, a voice warning, "This was once Eden, and now it shall be forgotten." Apocalyptic, yes. Allegorical, perhaps. But when you compare it to Plato's account, or to certain Gnostic texts from Egypt, or to fragments of Coptic sermons hinting at drowned kingdoms, the resonance is undeniable. The Codex of Azores, if it exists, may not have been about treasure at all. It may have been a memory preserved in ink, passed through orders of secrecy, carried westward by knights who believed they were guardians, not just of Christendom, but of a truth too dangerous to speak. Consider the strangeness. Why Azores? Why here? The chateau was not just a fortress, it was a commandery of the Templars, a crossroads between northern Europe and the sea. It was a place of secrecy, layered with underground tunnels, some of which remain sealed to this day. In the 20th century, French researchers attempted to excavate beneath the chapel. Their work was halted abruptly by the government, citing national heritage concerns. No official explanation followed. The tunnels remain closed, locked behind iron doors, and yet the rumors grow louder. One legend tells of a fresco hidden beneath layers of plaster in the chapel. It is said to depict a city of circles crumbling into the sea. Another of a parchment smuggled from the vaults centuries ago, bearing only a few words in Latin: Regnum sub, aqua, the kingdom, beneath the water. Coincidence or continuity? As night deepens, you can imagine descending into those tunnels yourself. The air grows damp, chalk dust clings to your hands, and the silence presses like a weight. At the end of a narrow passage, a bricked-up wall waits. Behind it the stories say lies the Codex. 30 coffers, sealed in darkness, each containing fragments of a past erased. What if the Codex was real? What if the Templars carried with them not only faith, not only treasure, but fragments of a story that stretched back before the flood? A story of a civilization radiant and punished, preserved in secret, hidden in stone. Such a story would be too dangerous for church or crown, too destabilizing for doctrine, for it would mean history was not as we are told, that Christendom was not the first sacred order, that even Eden was not the beginning. And so, the Codex of Azores remains sealed, its existence neither proven nor disproven. Skeptics laugh, but believers insist. And as long as the tunnels remain closed, as long as silence remains thicker than truth, the possibility endures. You close your eyes, and the image comes easily. A manuscript resting in darkness, ink faded but legible, circles of land and water, a temple at the center, and beneath it, a single phrase: "This shall not be spoken," only remembered. The Codex of Azores, perhaps legend, perhaps truth, but if ever it is found, it will not be gold the world uncovers, it will be memory. Not all secrets fled west. Some were carried in the opposite direction, back across the Mediterranean, through ports heavy with spice and salt, past crusader fortresses and caravan trails, all the way to Egypt. Egypt, the land of stone and sun, where time itself seems to stand still. Even in the 12th and 13th centuries, when the Templars rode through its deserts, the country already bore 10,000 years of memory. Pyramids rose from the sand like frozen thunder. Obelisks pointed to heavens older than Christendom. And in shadowed monasteries by the Nile, priests whispered stories far older than any scripture sanctioned by Rome. It was here, some say, that the Templars learned a different language of the sacred, not the Latin of the Church, but the guarded words of Copts and Sufis, of hermits who claimed descent from temple scribes. These were men who kept records not of kings and battles, but of floods and fire, of civilizations risen and drowned. Imagine a knight, weary from campaign, entering a monastery along the Nile Delta. He is given bread, water, and a place to sleep. But as the night deepens, a monk unrolls a scroll. On it, written in Coptic script, are tales of the first time, Zaptepi, when gods walked among men, when knowledge was given, and when a great deluge swallowed what had been built. The monk does not call it Atlantis. He calls it the kingdom before the flood. He calls it the city of the drowned kings. And he warns, do not forget, for what was will be again, if pride returns. The knight listens. He cannot write these words into his report. He cannot bring them back to France as doctrine, but he carries them in silence, a memory folded like parchment in the heart. Centuries later, fragments of Egyptian texts hint at the same. In the temple of Edfu, walls are carved with inscriptions of the island of the primeval ones, destroyed by flood, rebuilt by survivors. In Hermopolis, priests spoke of a sacred land that vanished beneath the sea. To Plato, these were stories told by Solon, the Greek who listened to Egyptian priests. To the Templars, they were confirmation that the philosopher's ink was not fantasy but inheritance. It is no wonder, then, that the Templars became fascinated with Egypt. Their red cross echoes the ancient solar disk. Their reverence for sacred geometry mirrors the ratios embedded in the pyramids. And their silence resembles the silence of the priests who guarded stories too dangerous to speak aloud. Picture now a gathering in Cairo. A knight sits with a Sufi mystic, the air heavy with incense. Between them lies a scrap of papyrus. It shows a circle, divided into rings of land and water. The mystic taps the center and whispers, the city that drowned. The knight nods. He does not need the word Atlantis. The image is enough. Did the Templars see in Egypt the key to Plato's words? Did they come to believe that the drowned kingdom was not myth, but memory preserved in hieroglyphs and chants? We cannot know, but silence often tells as much as speech. The Vatican condemned the Templars not only for alleged heresies, but for learning too much from the East, for bowing their heads not just before the crucifix, but before symbols older, stranger, less obedient to Rome. Perhaps it was in Egypt that the Templars began to see their mission differently, not only to guard relics, but to guard knowledge, to gather fragments of memory from Greece, from the Levant, from Coptic scrolls, from Sufi tales, to weave them into a story larger than any church would allow. A story of a world before, a flood, a fall, a warning. When you walk among the ruins of Egypt today, you feel it too. The silence between columns, the heat that seems older than the sun, the carved lines that speak of order and disaster, of gods who punished men with water. You hear in it the same warning Plato recorded, the same memory whispered at Azores, the same silence carried westward by ships that vanished. Egypt was not the destination, it was the key, the eastern gate through which the Templars glimpsed something vast and forbidden. And perhaps, in the vaults of Cairo or in monasteries hidden deep in desert valleys, some of that memory still lies waiting. A codex, a scroll, a fragment of stone bearing witness to a kingdom drowned, a kingdom remembered, a kingdom the Templars carried in silence. Close your eyes and you can see it, a knight kneeling in the shadow of a pyramid, the desert wind tugging at his mantle. Beside him, a priest whispers of the flood. Together they stare at the horizon, where sand meets sky and beyond that, sea. Both men know what is forgotten is never gone. The eastern gate holds its silence. But silence, as ever, is full of echoes. Beneath the stone chapels of Europe, under castles that now lie in ruin, there are vaults carved deep into earth and chalk, cold corridors damp with silence, lit only by the dim flame of memory. It is here, some whisper, that the Templars left their truest legacy, not in gold, not in relics, but in symbols. The Templars understood what the Church feared most, that truth could be hidden not only in words, but in shapes, in geometry, in patterns carved into stone. A symbol could carry memory longer than a manuscript. A symbol could survive flood, fire, persecution, even the silence of centuries. Walk into a Templar chapel, say, the round church of Tomar in Portugal, or the crypt of Azores in Normandy, and you will see it. Spirals etched into capitals, circles interlacing like ripples on water. Crosses carved not as decoration, but as equations. To the ordinary pilgrim, they were pious ornaments. To the initiated, they were a language of symbols. What did they mean? Some say they were echoes of Plato's City of Rings, Atlantis etched into stone long after the sea had taken it. Others suggest they were maps, cryptic diagrams pointing to hidden vaults, to islands far west, to memory itself. Consider the spiral, found in Templar sites from France to Scotland. It mirrors the concentric design Plato described. Land and water, alternating, circling outward. The spiral also mimics the motion of waves, the eternal return of flood and ebb. Was it simply decoration, or was it the drowned kingdom inscribed in stone? Consider the circle. In Templar architecture, circles dominate round chapels, circular towers, windows shaped as wheels. Plato's Atlantis was described not as a square city, but as rings. The Templars built rings in stone, perhaps to echo what had been lost. Even the cross itself held layers. The crosspay flaring outward at its arms resembled not only a Christian emblem, but the compass, the four directions, the meeting of heaven and earth. In some crypts, crosses are arranged in patterns that align with constellations, as though the Templars sought to link heaven, earth, and sea into a single code. But perhaps the greatest secrets lie underground. In Roslin Chapel in Scotland, built long after the Templar suppression, but by families tied to their bloodline, pillars and vaults drip with symbols. The famous apprentice pillar coils with spirals that scholars say resemble DNA, carvings of maize and aloe plants, native to the New World, appear decades before Columbus sailed. How could such knowledge exist here, unless it was carried by those who vanished westward, leaving behind their memory encoded in stone? In Portugal, at Almirall and Tomar, tunnels run beneath Templar castles, some leading nowhere, some bricked up. In France, beneath Azores, sealed passages hide behind chalk walls. In England, the vaults of Temple Church echo with acoustics designed to mimic a resonance found in ancient sanctuaries. All carry symbols, all whisper of memory. Imagine standing in one of those vaults. The air is cool, heavy with damp stone. Torchlight flickers, throwing shadows across carved spirals, circles, crosses. You trace them with your hand. They feel deliberate, purposeful. A language without words, a memory without voice. Could it be that the Templars, unable to preserve their knowledge in books, inscribed it into architecture itself, that every spiral, every ring, every pattern was a way of saying, Atlantis was real. Remember its fall. The Church taught of the flood of Noah, but the Templars, steeped in Plato, in Egyptian whispers, in symbols carried from east to west, may have believed in an older flood, still the flood that swallowed a kingdom of pride. Their vaults became reminders, their symbols became warnings. When you stand in those crypts today, you feel the weight of silence, not emptiness, but presence. The kind of silence that holds more than sound, it holds memory. It holds the echo of men who carved their truth into stone, trusting that someone, someday, would know how to read it. And tonight, as you let your thoughts drift, imagine those symbols glowing faintly in the dark. Spirals like ripples on black water. Circles enclosing circles. A city beneath the sea, remembered in stone, waiting to be seen. The underground vaults still stand. The language of symbols still whispers. We may not yet understand, but silence has its own grammar, and sometimes silence speaks louder than words. If the Templars whispered of drowned kingdoms in stone and symbol, if they carried parchments westward across the Atlantic and eastward into monasteries, then why has history preserved so little of their memory? Because silence can be orchestrated, and no one orchestrated silence more carefully than the Vatican. The papal archives are a labyrinth of shelves, vaults, and sealed chambers. Miles of documents, letters, chronicles, maps, testimonies stretch into darkness, guarded by keys and restrictions. Scholars estimate that less than 5% of this vast treasury has ever been made available to the public. The rest remains hidden, unread, unspoken. Within those sealed boxes lie the records of the Templars, trials conducted in secrecy, confessions extracted under torture, and documents missing. Consider this. In 2001, a forgotten manuscript called the Chinon Parchment was discovered in the archives. It proved that Pope Clement had absolved the Templar leaders of heresy. For centuries, the world believed they died condemned as heretics. In truth, the Church had quietly forgiven them, and yet that parchment had been buried in silence for 700 years. If such truths can be hidden, what else might slumber in the archives? Some whisper of a letter written in 1310 from a papal scribe who examined seized Templar documents. He spoke of strange geographies, of maps describing lands beyond the Great Western Sea. He mentioned a phrase in Latin, lux subunda, occidentally, the light beneath the western waves. The letter vanishes after this mention. No copy survives. Was it destroyed, or merely hidden, folded deep within the Vatican's labyrinth? Silence can be louder than denial. By withholding, by erasing, by locking away, the Church shaped memory. It did not have to declare Atlantis false. It only had to ensure no one spoke of it. And yet, fragments escaped. In 17th century Italy, whispers circulated of Atlantean manuscripts kept in the papal library. Jesuit scholars hinted at ancient maps forbidden to the common eye. Travelers from the court of Portugal claimed Rome possessed records older than discovery, maps that knew of lands far across the ocean. None of this can be proven, but all of it lingers in rumor, in silence. Why would the Vatican suppress such knowledge? Perhaps because it contradicted scripture. If civilizations existed before Noah's flood, if kingdoms fell outside the pages of Genesis, then the authority of Rome's narrative would be cracked. Atlantis, whether true or not, was dangerous because it was other. It was memory outside the canon. And so, silence became protection. Silence became power. But silence cannot erase entirely. In the margins of medieval manuscripts, small drawings, appearings of water, drowned towers, ships sailing west. In some monastic chronicles, priests note lands remembered in Plato, spoken in whispers by knights, always vague, never explicit. Enough to survive, not enough to be condemned. And silence has its rhythm. It is never perfect. Between the lines, in the missing pages, in the gaps of testimony, something glimmers, something waits. Imagine the Vatican vaults at night. Endless shelves, dust motes drifting in shafts of lamplight, boxes stacked higher than ladders. Somewhere, sealed in parchment, lies a map. Circles drawn in ink, notes in Latin margins. Beyond Hercules' pillars, kingdom drowned. A clerk once handled it, once read it, then locked it away. Generations have passed. The map still sleeps. And tonight, as you listen, you are closer to it than any archivist, because you know silence is not absence. Silence is orchestration. A silence designed, deliberate, purposeful. The Vatican may never reveal what it holds. The doors may remain closed, but outside, in the world of stone crosses, forgotten codices, vanished fleets, the silence speaks anyway. And so, the memory of Atlantis is not entirely lost. It is remembered in absence, in the way the church avoided the word, in the way records break off mid. It is remembered not in proclamation, but in omission. For the greatest secret is not what is written, it is what is withheld. Close your eyes, and you can almost hear it's the silence of vaulted halls, the rustle of unseen pages, the weight of truths unspoken. The Vatican's greatest power is not in what it declares, but in what it refuses to say. And in that silence, Atlantis survives. If the Vatican's vaults are a silence of absence, then Roslin Chapel is a silence of stone. It stands just outside Edinburgh, small compared to the great cathedrals of Europe, yet filled with carvings so dense, so intricate, that to walk its aisles is to feel surrounded by a language no one has fully translated. Roslin, sometimes spelled Roslin, was founded in the 15th century by William Sinclair, a nobleman whose family had long ties to the remnants of the Knights Templar. Though the order had been dissolved more than a century earlier, whispers suggest their bloodlines. Their symbols, their memory, survived through families like the Sinclairs. And in Roslin's stone, that memory is carved for all to see, though few can understand. Step inside. The light falls through narrow windows, catching dust in golden shafts. Every column, every arch, every ceiling rib is alive with detail. Angels, vines, musical instruments, stars, flowers. But among them are carvings that should not exist. Corn, aloe, plants native to the Americas, plants no European should have known in the 1440s, half a century before Columbus crossed the Atlantic. How could they appear here in a chapel in Scotland, unless someone who had seen them or heard of them carried the memory back earlier, unless a vanished fleet had already sailed west, unless Roslin was meant to record that truth in stone. And then there is the apprentice pillar, a single column coiled in spirals so intricate they resemble strands of DNA, or perhaps the rings of water described by Plato. Legend says the master mason had not yet designed it, but an apprentice dreamed of its form, carved it while his master was away, and was struck down in jealousy upon the master's return. Yet the pillar remains, coiling upward like a memory reaching for the light. Some say it is a tree of life, others that it encodes geometry of a lost science. Still others whisper it is a symbol of Atlantis, itself a spiral, a circle, a drowned city remembered not in parchment but in stone, and beneath the chapel, sealed crypts. For centuries, rumors claimed that under Roslin lie the bones of Templar knights, buried in armor, resting in long forgotten vaults. Some even whisper that relics of immense power are hidden there, the Grail, the Ark, or the Codex of Atlantis itself. The crypts remain closed, their secrets protected by the Sinclair line, their silence deeper than stone. But silence is never empty. Even in what can be seen, Roslin whispers, carvings of 8-pointed stars, spirals and circles, patterns that echo Templar geometry, patterns that echo Plato's city of rings. Some scholars dismiss it as coincidence. Yet when you stand there, when you let your eyes drift across the ceiling ribs alive with vines and knots, you feel something intentional, a message buried not in words, but in images. And then there is the light. Roslin is famous for the way sunlight moves through its windows, striking certain carvings at certain times of year. On solstices and equinoxes, light touches specific symbols, the green man, the apprentice pillar, the spiral designs. Was it designed as a calendar, a marker of seasons, or was it a reminder of cycles of rise and fall, of pride and flood, of kingdoms born and drowned? For Atlantis, in Plato's telling, was not only a city, it was a warning. And perhaps Roslin's eternal light, moving across stone as the earth turns, was meant to remind all who entered. Time moves, pride returns, silence breaks. Imagine walking there at dusk. The air is cool, the stone smells of centuries. A beam of light lingers on the apprentice pillar, catching its spirals, making them glow faintly as though alive. You trace the carvings with your hand. They feel like waves, like ripples, like memory. You realize the stone is not silent at all. It is speaking, whispering, remembering. Perhaps Roslin is not only a chapel. Perhaps it is a codex in stone. A memory preserved when parchments could be burned, when ships could be sunk, when vaults could be sealed. A place where geometry itself became scripture, where symbols became scripture, where silence itself became a form of prayer. Roslin has been called many things: the Bible in stone, the Chapel of Secrets, the last cry of the Templars. But perhaps it is also this: a map, not of coastlines, but of cycles, not of lands, but of warnings. A map of Atlantis not as a place to be found, but as a memory to be remembered. The eternal light still falls through its windows. The spirals still coil upward. The crypts still wait in silence. And Atlantis still whispers, not beneath the sea, but in stone. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, imagine yourself beneath that vaulted ceiling, the scent of dust and candle wax in the air. The last rays of sun touch the spiral pillar, glowing like a memory that refuses to fade. In that light, in that silence, you realize Atlantis is not gone. It is here. It is remembered. And Roslin Chapel keeps the memory alive. If Roslin Chapel is a memory carved in stone, then myths of the flood are memories carved in the human mind. Everywhere you look, in the deserts of Mesopotamia, in the jungles of Central America, in the mountains of Tibet, you find the same story told with different names. A world destroyed by water, a few who survived. A warning that echoes across cultures as though whispered from a single drowning voice. The Bible tells us of Noah, a man who built an ark and carried life through the deluge. But Noah is not alone. In Sumer, far older, we hear of Ziusudra, chosen by the gods to survive the flood that ended an age. In Babylon, Atrahasis, in Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha, and in whispers from other lands, still more. Among the Maya of Central America, myths speak of a previous world destroyed by flood. They say the gods washed away an arrogant race of men who had forgotten reverence, sparing only a few to rebuild. Among the Hopi of the American Southwest, elders tell of ancestors who climbed into hollow reeds as waters rose. guided by the Spider-Woman to safety in the mountains. On the far side of the ocean, the Dogon of Mali speak of amphibious teachers, the Namo, who came from the sky after a flood to bring order and knowledge. In Tibet, the Bon tradition tells of a sacred land destroyed by water, from which only a handful of priests escaped, carrying their wisdom into the high valleys. Different languages, different gods, yet the same rhythm: pride, destruction, survival, memory. It is as if humanity cannot forget. Now imagine the Templars wandering east and west, listening to priests, mystics, shamans, scholars. Everywhere they go, they hear the same tale told in different tongues. To a knight trained to see patterns, to seek hidden unity, how could this not sound like truth? The flood was not a myth, it was a memory. Atlantis was not an invention. It was one chapter in a story told by every culture beneath the sun, and the survivors. Perhaps they were not merely lucky, perhaps they were chosen to carry memory forward, to rebuild, to plant fragments of lost knowledge into new soils. The Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time when gods walked among men after the flood. The Greeks spoke of Prometheus, bringer of fire to a new humanity. The Maya spoke of ancestors taught once more to plant, to write, to build. The Templars may have believed themselves heirs to that chain. Survivors of destruction, guardians of memory, keepers of the flame. Their crosses in stone, their spirals in chapels, their vanished fleetal echoes of the same task: to remember what was lost and warn of what could be lost again. Consider the pattern. Every flood story ends not only with survival, but with rebirth. Survivors emerge from arcs, from caves, from mountains, carrying seeds of knowledge. They become the founders of civilizations. They teach agriculture, astronomy, law, sacred order. They are the bridge between the drowned world and the new. What if Atlantis was not merely a city that vanished, but the memory of that bridge? A name given to the survivors who carried fragments of light into the darkness of flood. The Azores with their stone crosses, Egypt with its temple inscriptions, the Americas with carvings of strangers arriving by sea, the Dogon with their star knowledge of Sirius. All are fragments, scattered across continents, yet echoing the same theme. Survival is never only physical, it is also memory. Picture a small group huddled on a mountain peak as waters rage below. They carry little tools, seeds, scrolls wrapped in oilskin. When the waters recede, they descend. They plant, they build, they teach. Their descendants tell their story, and thousands of years later, in Scotland or France or Portugal, a knight hears that story and recognizes in it the same shape told by Plato. It is no longer myth, it is lineage. And so the Templars may have seen themselves as not merely monks, nor warriors, nor bankers, but survivors of survivors. Their task to guard the memory of the drowned kingdom, to keep alive the warning, to pass it forward in stone, in parchment, in silence. When you close your eyes, you can hear those flood stories blending into one. The voice of an Egyptian priest, the chant of a Hopi elder, the whisper of a Dogon storyteller beneath the stars, the scripture of Genesis read by candlelight, all speaking together, saying, "We remember, we were there, we survived." And if memory survives across such distances, perhaps it is because it was meant to. The Great Flood was not a story to entertain, it was a warning. Atlantis was not only pride punished, it was a lesson carved into human memory, to be carried across oceans, across centuries, across silence. The survivors still speak, if you know how to listen. And tonight, as waves of sleep carry you, You can imagine yourself among them, standing on a high mountain, watching the waters recede, holding in your hands the seed of a story you must not let die. You are part of the memory. You are part of the survival. You are part of Atlantis. Not all memories are written in stone or carved into maps. Some are carried in the body itself, in bloodlines, in symbols passed through families, in whispers that move from parent to child like an inheritance no crown can strip away. And in Europe, no dynasty has drawn more whispers of forgotten memory than the Merovingians. They ruled in the shadows of the early Middle Ages, long before Templars, long before the great cathedrals of Paris or Chartres. Their kingdom stretched across what is now France and Germany. They were called the long-haired kings, for they refused to cut their hair, believing their strength and legitimacy were bound to it. Their emblem was not the cross of Christendom, but the bee, a creature tied to honey, to resurrection, to memory itself. The Merovingians claimed descent from something older than Rome, older even than the Franks who crowned them. Some said they came from across the sea, others from a union between a queen and a mysterious sea creature, half man, half beast. Still others whispered that they bore the blood of giants, of those who lived before the flood. To the church, such tales were dangerous. A dynasty that claimed its authority not from Rome, not from baptism, but from memory older than Genesis itself, that could not be allowed. And so, the Merovingians were diminished, overthrown, and written out of history's grandeur. Their bloodline, however, did not vanish. It threaded quietly through Europe's noble houses, surviving in silence. Here, the Templars entered the story, for many of their commanderies stood on lands once tied to Merovingian kings. Some of their earliest patrons were of families who traced descent from that ancient line, and in their symbols, the bee, the serpent, the fish one finds echoes of Merovingian myth. Did the Templars believe that the Merovingians carried not just royal blood, but memory itself? That in their veins ran a trace of Atlantis, of the drowned kingdom remembered? It is a strange thought. Yet bloodlines have always carried power in the imagination of men. To say one descends from survivors of the flood, from kings of a forgotten age, is to claim legitimacy deeper than crowns. It is to say, I do not rule because Rome wills it. I rule because memory flows in me. In medieval chronicles, curious hints survive. A monk in the 10th century wrote that the Merovingians were of the sea, like dolphins returned to land. Another, that their symbol of the bee was chosen because it remembers the summer in the winter, the light in the darkness. Bees, after all, survive floods, carried on drifting hives. Was this a metaphor, or a whisper of memory older than Christendom? Now, imagine the Templars, sworn to secrecy, seeking allies after their suppression. Would they not turn to bloodlines that carried whispers of a forgotten legitimacy? Would they not see in the Merovingian heirs a continuity of their own mission to guard memory, to outlive silence, to preserve a truth too dangerous for Rome? Roslin Chapel, carved by the Sinclair family, carried those whispers into Scotland. The Sinclairs themselves were tied by marriage and myth, two bloodlines claimed as Merovingian. Bees appear carved into capitals, serpents coil in stone. A silent genealogy of memory written not in parchment, but in veins. What if Atlantis did not vanish only into sea and silence? What if it also survived in blood? Survivors of the flood, carrying fragments of knowledge, mingling with new peoples, birthing dynasties who bore strange symbols and strange claims. The Merovingians in this reading were not merely kings. They were keepers, a living archive, moving through generations. The Vatican, of course, feared such stories. For if blood itself could carry memory, then no burning of books, no suppression of orders, no erasure of fleets could destroy it. The church could control parchment, it could control stone, but veins were beyond its reach. And so the Merovingians became another silence, their bees forgotten, their claims dismissed as myth, their dynasty relegated to footnotes. Yet the whispers endure. In secret societies, in novels, in conspiracies of modern imagination, the Merovingians rise again as guardians of hidden truth. Perhaps not the Grail as a chalice, but the Grail as bloodline. Perhaps not a treasure of gold, but a treasure of memory. Picture it, a candlelit chamber, somewhere in 12th century France. A Templar and a Merovingian heir sit across from one another. On the table between them lies not treasure, but a genealogy. Lines tracing back not merely to Clovis or Charlemagne, but further to a union with something of the sea. The knight nods, understanding. For him, Atlantis was never only a city. It was a lineage, a memory in the veins of men. And tonight, as you let your eyes close, imagine that blood still flowing, centuries later, through veins unknowing. Imagine memory itself carried quietly, waiting for the moment it is recognized. Perhaps not in kings, perhaps not in knights, but in the quiet persistence of symbols, bees, serpents, spirals that refuse to die. Atlantis survives in silence, in stone, in symbols, and perhaps in blood. If bloodlines carried memory through veins, and symbols carried memory through stone, then perhaps the Templars did something even more audacious. Perhaps they laid out an entire map across Europe itself, cartography not drawn in ink, but in the placement of their strongholds, chapels, and commanderies, a map in stone. From Portugal to Scotland, from France to Cyprus, Templar architecture follows patterns too deliberate to dismiss. Commanderies appear aligned with stars, with solstices, with each other. Some form triangles across hundreds of miles. Others form circles, as though replicating Plato's description of Atlantis in the very landscape of Christendom. Take Tomar, the great Templar seat in Portugal. Its round church mirrors the temple of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, but its orientation points not east, but subtly west, toward the Atlantic. From Tomar, draw lines to Almoral and Monsanto, to other Templar fortresses. The geometry forms a perfect isosceles triangle, its apex angled into the ocean, as though marking a path beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Or look north, to Scotland. Roslin Chapel lies along a line that connects other sacred sites, Templar preceptories, stone circles, ancient cairns. Some researchers argue that when mapped, these sites create patterns resembling constellations. Orion's belt, the Pleiades, the very stars Plato said guided ancient sailors. Coincidence or coordinates? In France, the same. Commanderies in the Languedoc land, once home to the Cathars, another persecuted order, stand in arrangements that echo spirals and circles. In some cases, chapels dedicated to Saint Michael, the Archangel of Judgment, are placed along lines that stretch westward, like markers pointing to something beyond the sea. The Templars were not only warriors, they were surveyors, builders, geometers. They understood the language of earth and sky. And if they believed in Atlantis, if they believed in Plato's drowned city, then perhaps they chose to inscribe its memory not only in vaults and manuscripts, but in the very geography of Europe. Imagine a knight standing on the ramparts of Tomar, gazing westward. Behind him lies a fortress of stone. Before him, the Atlantic. In his hand, not a map of ink, but knowledge of where other fortresses stand. Lines across land, lines across memory, and those lines converge, like arrows pointing to a place beyond the horizon. Some call this mere romantic fancy. They argue the alignment's a coincidence, the product of too many sights and too much imagination. But even skeptics admit the Templars built with precision. They aligned to stars. They carved geometry into stone. They left patterns behind, and patterns, once seen, cannot be unseen. There are whispers of something even stranger, that beneath certain Templar churches lie floor mosaics resembling maps of the Atlantic. At Azores tiles in the crypt form concentric rings. At Tomar, fragments of a mural depict a circle of land surrounded by water. Always vague, never explicit, but always enough to spark the question, were these coordinates of Atlantis? The Azores, marked by crosses of stone, may have been one waypoint. Roslin, with its carvings of New World plants, another memory, and between them, across Europe, the geometry of chapels forming a compass, a silent map laid out for those who could read. To most, they were fortresses. To the Templars, perhaps they were something more, stones set as stars, coordinates etched in earth. A reminder of where to look, a promise of what once was, and always the motif of the circle. Rings upon rings, whether in architecture, in symbols, in alignments. Echoes of Plato's city, echoes of waves rippling outward from a single fall. Tonight, imagine yourself walking across that map, from Portugal to France, from France to Scotland. Each fortress, each chapel, each crypt a marker. You draw the lines between them, and they converge westward into the ocean. The Atlantic stretches before you, dark and infinite, and at its heart, though no land rises, you feel the memory of circles beneath the waves. The Templars may not have found Atlantis. They may not have needed to, for in their map of stone, they ensured it could never be forgotten. Atlantis was not only a place, it was a pattern, a geometry written into the earth itself, a memory turned into coordinates, and perhaps, if you learn to read the silence of stone, you can still follow that map today. We began with a map dated 1351, its ink whispering of lands that should not exist. We followed a fleet vanishing into the mist of La Rochelle, its sails swallowed by silence. We traced crosses carved into the stones of the Azores, spirals etched into chapel vaults, crypts sealed beneath Azores, and carvings alive with memory at Roslin. Each step brought us closer to a city that may never have been found, downed yet was never entirely lost, Atlantis. But perhaps we have been asking the wrong question all along. Perhaps the true mystery is not where Atlantis was, but why its memory was carried so far, so carefully, so silently. For Plato did not write of Atlantis as a geography lesson. He wrote it as a warning, a tale of a kingdom blessed beyond measure, rising in power and arrogance, forgetting reverence, defying order, a kingdom destroyed not by chance, but by pride. And the Templars, if they did carry this memory, did not need to find Atlantis to believe in its truth. To them, Atlantis was not a destination. It was a mirror. Look around their world. Kings who sought power above all, popes who wielded faith as weapon, empires rising and crushing in greed. The Templars themselves, once the most powerful order in Christendom, fell to pride and envy, consumed by the ambitions of crown and church. Did they not see in their own story the echo of Atlantis? And so they remembered. In maps, they traced coastlines to remind the world that knowledge can be lost. In chapels, they carved spirals to remind the world that cycles return. In bloodlines, they preserved whispers of survival. In silence, they carried the truth that arrogance always summons the flood. Atlantis was never simply a city. It was a parable etched into memory, a warning that what rises to high will fall. A memory meant not to lure us into searching the ocean floor, but to remind us that we too live on fragile ground. The Vatican may have hidden documents, chronicles may have fallen silent, but silence cannot erase a warning. Warnings live in symbols, in stories, in the myths told to children by firelight. They live in us. And perhaps that was the Templars' truest mission, not to hoard treasure, not to guard relics, but to guard memory, to carry forward a story that would outlast fleets, outlast kingdoms, outlast themselves. Picture it, a Templar knight in exile, long after the order has been shattered. He sits by firelight, telling his child of a city that rose and fell beneath the sea. He does not say Atlantis. He does not speak of Plato. He simply says, "Remember when pride grows to great, the waters will come." And the child remembers. The story passes on. Atlantis is not only in the ocean. Atlantis is in us. In our rise, in our arrogance, in our forgetting, in our need to remember. And that is why perhaps the story endures. The Templars did not need to find Atlantis. By preserving its memory, they became Atlantis themselves, survivors who carried the warning into a new age. Their silence, their symbols, their vanished fleet, their crosses carved in stone, these are not proofs of geography, they are proofs of intent. They meant for us to remember. And tonight, as you drift between waking and sleep, imagine Atlantis not beneath the waves, but within your thoughts. A city of circles, glowing in memory. Its towers rise, its harbors teem, its people rejoice in abundance. Then pride grows. The earth trembles, the waters come, the city sinks, and silence falls. But the memory does not drown. It rises again, in whispers, in maps, in symbols, in you. Atlantis, in the end, is not a place to be discovered. It is a warning to be heard. And the Templars, whether they sailed west or not, whether they carved crosses in stone or not, ensured that the warning endures. The flood is not only past, the flood is always possible. Pride always returns, but so does memory. And so, the last word is not silence. The last word is remembrance. Close your eyes now and let the waves of sleep carry you. Imagine the fleet of La Rochelle sailing endlessly across the horizon. Imagine Roslin's spirals glowing softly. Imagine the Codex of Azores resting in its vault. And know that none of it is lost. It lives, waiting, whispering. Atlantis is here. Atlantis is now. Atlantis is in the memory you carry forward. And that memory will not drown.